Hello there, and welcome to the Pegasus Initiative, or Personal Evolution through Genetic Adaptations and Streamlining by Intelligent Selection. I'd like to personally thank you. Your service will help our organization ensure the future of humanity. Right now, our technological innovations are far outpacing natural selection, and our goal is to put humans on an equal footing with our creations. Here to explain more is our chief scientist, number 9. Thank you, number 6. Here at Pegasus, we use evolution accelerators. We're able to create the environmental conditions that would require extreme adaptations for survival. Then, with our proprietary method, we use these desirements to speed up genetic mutations using the body's own natural mechanisms. All of this will be made clear to you should you survive to level Romeo. All of this will be made clear to you if you progress to level Romeo. In the meantime, you will begin your medication regimen in physical isolation for the next 30 days. Once complete, you will be collected and brought to our facility. You will then be tested for biological flexibility. Should you pass, you will be given your first stipend and then proceed to level Charlie. The follow-on levels will be revealed to you at this time. In the meantime, I must insist that you stick to our medication and isolation regimen to avoid another incident. For your health and safety. Good luck and welcome to tomorrow. Well, here we are. Last lecture of the semester. Wow, I don't know about you guys, but I'm exhausted. This has been a lot, and as it is for everybody. But I can't tell you how impressed I am with just how well you guys have come along through this and how much you've really learned. As we finish up here, we really have talked about everything. Right? We've talked about all the oceanography we possibly can. And by the way, this really is still just an introduction. There's so much more to learn out there. And we've added the beginning of the universe and all the processes through the earth and through time, right? So in this last bit, we're going to try and answer those last couple questions I had given you. And that was, what is evolution and where does it come from? Well, to start this off, first of all, yeah, this is going to be not like Pegasus. So that, I don't know if that creeped you out a little bit. I think it creeped me out. But we're going to talk about natural selection evolution, right? Darwinian evolution and beyond. So the first thing I want to do is actually talk about what evolution isn't. All right, so many of you have seen this figure, right? This is that pretty famous evolution of man, right? From chimpanzee to walking upright. Well, you know what? This is really cool for some memes. In fact, I have a t-shirt that I think the end part is a drummer. So really neat, but it's just not true. This is not how evolution works. And I'm gonna throw up a different figure. Now this one's actually kind of old, but I really like it and I'm gonna point out why. So this is showing you, an evolutionary tree from the Devonian. Don't worry about the time periods. That's not important here. We have the age of man, fishes and reptiles. But what's important is the way it's drawn. I'm not sure the intent behind the way this was drawn, but it is a fantastic representation of how evolution actually works. So what I'll say is that this figure is sort of backwards. So sure, if you take and you find one of these lines up here at the top, the age of man, you find man, right? And you trace backwards, you can find a continuous line all the way back, right? A continuous path all the way back as far as you want. And then if you just took that path and got rid of everything else, you would get a figure like that. But again, that's working backwards. That's just to say if you went out and got lost in the woods, right? And ended up home, you went, great, I had the exact perfect path to get home. Well, no, you probably took a bunch of routes and got lost and didn't know where you were. And if you went backwards, you could find your footsteps. But that doesn't mean you had this intent, right, to end up here. So let me explain that. You can see most of these branches go nowhere, right? Starting at the bottom, they just disappear. And again, this might have been the artist just making this look the way they wanted to, but it's very important because most of evolution is an experiment, and most of the time it doesn't work, right? This is just a continual experiment by nature to kind of put things in place. And I say put, I'm going to use these words, and don't take that literally. It's not actually picking and choosing. But this is sort of that mild progress. So let me tell you. So the reason we kind of think of it this way is based on the fossil evidence. So we can look at the fossil evidence and see. This is a cartoon, but see things like this, and we see different levels. And again, geologists will break things up by epochs and eons and whatnot, and we find fossils at each one of these. Well, the fossil record is very dependent on what's going on. Are the fossils even preserved? Do we have the right sedimentation to trap them without them getting eaten? There's various things. So they give us a snapshot through time of what was happening right then. All right. And then again, yes, if you went back, you'd find ape, you'd find the missing link, you'd find the next creature and the next creature, but it's more gradual than that. So I just want you to realize there's a difference between the fossil record and picking those things out and what's going on that we have to interpret and figure out. So I'll give you a couple examples. So the first one, let's just talk about bananas, right? Everybody loves bananas, right? You go to the grocery store, well, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people love bananas. You go to the grocery store, there's a bunch of bananas. Actually, there is a bunch of bananas, but anyhow, that's not a banana. That's a human-induced evolved banana. This is a banana, all right? A natural banana. And what happens is over time, right? They didn't just go from this to that. Somebody in this, again, this is people, so I'm using this because it's pretty rapid. Oh, well, this one has a few less seeds, and those seeds are really annoying. So I'm gonna choose this one, all right? And maybe even breed it, but maybe not. Maybe just choose to eat it and spread the seeds. This one's a little juicier, I'm going to choose that, or a little sweeter. And over time, whether absolutely selecting or just because those are the favorable things we like in fruit, we get something like this. Very little seeds, very easy to eat, full of sugar, full of nutrients, and portable. It makes it really easy. So that is more evolution. It's this gradual stepping process, right? It's not these layers of instantaneous things. So I'm going to use another example here pretty soon. It's going to be, everybody's favorite. I keep saying everybody. Maybe you don't like puppies, but that would be rough. Oh, God, that just happened. Anyhow, we're going to talk about puppies, okay? And we're going to talk about puppies because now we're specifically going to get into what evolution is. And as it's defined, it is the change in the heritable characteristics of biological populations over successive generations. And that may seem kind of weird. I mean, you can look that up. But there's some specific terms that I want to focus on as we move forward. First one is heritable characteristics. I mean, obviously change, but heritable. They have to be passed down. It's not just something that happens. That's not evolution. And I'll explain that here in a little bit. And they have to be in populations over generations, right? They have to keep carrying down. So I'm going to use these puppies, and we'll use this picture, and I'm going to point out here, okay, they look pretty similar. This is a litter of puppies, probably yellow labs. They look very similar. But if you start to look a little closer, there's tiny differences, both physically and personality-wise. So you can look that this guy has a little spot above his nose is maybe a little darker and a little shaped a little bit differently than that one. Not a big deal, maybe not noticeable. I'm sure if he was yours, you'd notice that. So some minor changes. Maybe, some of the fur is a little tiny bit darker than some of the other ones, or some of it might be a little bit thicker. Stuff that's not going to matter that much. And then there might be some differences in personalities. Like this guy looks like he's just like ready to go. Like, just let me out. I'm ready to go. And these other ones just can't be bothered, right? I'm good. I'm comfortable. I'm warm. Nobody move. Right? So differences in personality. So what that means is these are characteristics, okay? These are characteristics of these animals. And they may get passed down, all right? They may be heritable. Maybe personality is heritable. Maybe it's not. So that wouldn't be an evolution in personality if it didn't manifest itself. Like if this one had puppies and they were all like calm and quiet, well, that's not evolution. But if, every puppy comes out with a spot that looks just like that, well, that is. And it's not a big deal, but it happens, and it happens through the generations. So what we're going to do with this definition is we're going to talk about 5 key aspects that Charles Darwin put out. And again, we have other ways to talk about evolution, but we're going to start here because these are still very important and very relevant. And those 5 key points to natural selection, the first one is not all offspring survive to a reproductive age. Now that doesn't mean, if you're thinking of puppies, that doesn't mean something terrible's happened. It just means that, everything has a lifespan and some things reproduce and some don't, all right? So if there's a change, let's say that spot and that puppy never had puppies, well, that's not natural selection because it never got passed on. That's all that means. The second one is that there are random variations, and some are inheritable, like we just talked about. Those random variations, some of them may be passed down to the next generation and some may not. Now, the third one is some of these variations may make an organism more suitable to an environment. So, I guess in the case of puppies, they're all adorable, but one may be a little more aggressive than the other. They may get food a little bit more than another. It may make them more suitable to a household with a lot of animals, right? To have to fight for it. That's just one example. I'll come to a different one that's actually not in a human home here in a little bit. But that's just to note that some of these changes, however slight, might make them more suitable to where they are. And the fourth one is that these favorable traits tend to accumulate. So even if they're not incredibly perceptible or dramatic, if they're a little bit better, they'll probably accumulate through successive generations. They'll just start to pile up and build up. So it may seem like something's perfectly adapted for what they're doing, but that's just this long process of all these little things kind of coming to an end. Like I said, you can use that same analogy of getting lost in the woods, and at the end it looks like I meant to do this the whole time. Well, probably not, but we got there eventually. And the fifth one, which is really important, is if the environment changes, those favorable traits will change. And I say this is really important because, including that figure that I showed you, we have this idea that evolution is this progress towards some sort of perfection. The term survival of the fittest, which meant something different when it was used than it kind of does now, is kind of stuck in our heads. But that's not really it. Like, something is well adapted to its environment. Well, if you take it out of that environment, they're not perfect. They just happen to be best suited for where they are. So when the environment changes, and I talk about this because we are in the midst of global environmental change, this is very important. So let's start showing some examples of what I mean by all of these. And we're going to start back with Charles Darwin. He went around the world, a ton of evidence that led him to his theory of evolution. And oh, by the way, he had trouble with this. He deliberated on this for many, many years. He collected all his evidence as a young man and then published his work as an old man. This was hard for him, but he couldn't fight the evidence around him, what he saw and what he collected. Now, there's a lot of it. I'm going to touch on one thing in particular, and that's the Darwin's finches. Fairly famous. What this means is he spent a considerable amount of time in the Galapagos Islands off the west coast of Ecuador there in the Pacific. And he looked at these finches because on each island were finches. And they were all the same except for their beaks, right? Which were, there was probably some other characteristics too, but these were particularly adapted to whatever food they ate. So you can see here in this figure, and you guys have your notes there, something's eating seeds. It's got this hard beak to be able to open seeds. Insects, a little bit pointy. Some birds use tools. And yes, some birds like crows, I'm not getting on this, but YouTube crow intelligence. It's unbelievable how smart they are and how they can use tools. But anyhow, the point here is that they're each suited to whatever they eat. Now, they didn't just one bird didn't just have this beak and one bird had this beak and they went to different islands. It might be something that, let's take the leaves guy here. They were on the island, turned out there was more insects than leaves, and the ones that started to get a little bit pointier, might have done better. And another important note is that doesn't mean the other ones died off, okay? It just meant that the bird that was a little bit more suitable was more able to efficiently get food. This could mean just that you got enough food and had enough time to, have some shenanigans and reproduce while the other birds were still looking for food. So again, this doesn't mean that all of a sudden something popped in and just beat everything else out. It just means this slow progress. So another example I have, let's say we have a herd of deer somewhere. And some of them have slightly thicker fur than others. Okay, sort of like that puppy population. There could be some slight differences. they're living nice and happy, and some of them break off, okay? And they migrate to what will ostensibly be a cooler climate. So it might be summer, they move to the mountains, and all of a sudden it gets cold. Well, some of these are going to be more adapted. And I know it shows, the deer dying here, but let's back away from that a little bit and go back to maybe that just means that, these deer that were warmer didn't have to eat as much to maintain that metabolism, right? They didn't have to spend all their time looking for food. They had more time to be amorous, and they were able to reproduce, okay? So these are very slight differences that you might not even notice. You might see all these deer, they look just fine, not realizing that some of them were better adapted. And as the years pass, again, these traits will tend to accumulate in the population. So again, the ones with short hair aren't just dying off, it's just that they're not doing as well, okay? So that's what this means. So again, traits passed down by successive generations. Not all offspring survive. I'm going to forget these. The environment changes, the favorable traits were changing. Down here, it's warmer. The deer with the lighter fur was probably a little bit better. So anyhow, that's a possibility. Now, another one is in the vein of, let's call it, camouflage. How about just camouflage? And this has a lot of different reasons for camouflage, but I'll just show you this. So I'm going to show you this figure, all right? This is a nice snowy scene, something out of a, card, postcard or something. Well, how many animals do you see? Do you see any? I'll give you a second. Can you find them? Well, how about now? Okay, so we have animals in this photo that were incredibly adapted to hide, whether for whatever reason they're hiding in the snow, but as soon as that environment changes, they're not exactly adapted anymore. So a camouflage has that same property. It has to be suited to the environment, okay? You take them out of that environment and they're no longer best suited. Okay, so something else with camouflage is, again, not all organisms have to have it. They don't all have to progress to the same thing. So if I show you these photos here of 4 Arctic organisms, so we've got an Arctic fox, a polar bear, a rabbit, and an ox, right, musk ox. So anyhow, you'll notice 3 of them are lighter colored fur, and there's reasons for that. So in the case of this guy here, really trying to not get eaten is basically the point, right? So the ones that had the lighter fur were able to hide a little bit better and not get eaten. And then these 2 guys, right, or gals, they are looking for food. They want to hide to sneak up on things. They want to sneak up on this rabbit who keeps getting harder and harder to find. So different reasons, but they want to blend into their environment. Now this one does not care, okay? They live there, they all have these thick coats to survive, right? They all adapted that. But there was absolutely no reason for lighter fur to accumulate in these populations because, number one, they eat grass, so they're not hunting anything. And they're so big that nobody's going to bother with them, so they don't have to hide. So again, this is important because it really depends, and these are slow adaptations. Something else to note is we can start to see evidence of this. Right? Like I said, it's not just that we're looking at fossil records and saying, yep, this happened. There's evidence all around us. So the first way is something called convergent evolution, all right? And that's where organisms that come from different lineages end up evolving similar features. So take an example, since we are in oceanography, and look at this feature. So we have a shark, we have a dinosaur, we have a penguin, and we have a porpoise or a dolphin. So fish, reptile, bird, and mammal. Well, what they've done is they've all adapted something to be able to swim. So we have a pectoral fin, a flipper in a dinosaur, we have a wing adapted in a bird, and a forelimb adapted in a mammal. But they've all converged towards being able to live in this environment. So this is one of the first ways we can see. We can see this type of evolution all around us. The second one is something called comparative biology. So if I look at something like a dog's paw or a dog's arm and a human arm and a bat wing and a whale flipper, you can look inside them and see that they all have similar bones. They're just put in different ways. So we can see that they all came from something originally the same. All right, so that's one way we can look right now and see this evidence. Now the last one is kind of my own interpretation, just kind of looking around and observing. So let's take a look at this guy, right? Sea lions. They're great. Some of you have seen sea lions. I used to, volunteer in an aquarium and got to swim with them, which was kind of cool. But, we're used to them, but they're really weird looking. I mean, just look at that. And if you've ever seen them try and walk around on land, it's not elegant. Now, in the water, they're fantastic, right? But they're not as, say, adapted to the water as a dolphin or a whale. So let's look at this figure up here. And this is just actually something I found, an artist's rendition of maybe how something went from land and became a whale, all right? So these successive generations. Well, when I look at this figure, right there in the middle, I don't know, that kind of looks like a sea lion. Something that isn't quite a land animal, but not quite an aquatic animal yet, somewhere in transition. So either, wherever the food is, they're either moving towards the water or towards land. We don't really know. Anyhow, this is just something to think about. This is nothing, I didn't find a paper on this or anything, but just as you look around, there's evidence of change. And, these adaptations aren't perfect. They're just what's suited at the time. So you guys might be a little bit young, but anybody out there that has lower back problems, think about that. We walk upright, and most people, the vast majority of people have lower back problems. And that's because the way our spine is curved, it works. It works to help us and our pelvis and everything else to walk around upright and do what we need to do. But it's not perfect at all. It's just what happens to work. All right, so anyhow, as we move forward, I talk about these gradual changes, and that's important to remember in natural selection is these are gradual. These are minor things over time. We saw that first tree that just, again, like that lost in the forest, eventually they get to somewhere and they find their niche and they're adapted. Well, every once in a while, nature has different ideas, okay? And they say, all right, well, we need to start over. And there's some catastrophic events, right? We have these mass extinctions. And as it turns out, we've had about, or at least we can see in the record, we've had about 5 mass extinctions in the last 450 million years. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these. You guys can read this and see it in your notes. But, just to point out, like this last one, 65 million years ago, the extinction of the dinosaurs. And, again, the other ones, mass extinctions of organisms. And these could have been from extraterrestrial impacts or volcanism or climate change is a big one. All right, so these can happen very fast. So that's pretty much what evolution is. Again, this is by no means the extensive information on the topic, but it is an intro and it is a snapshot. And I hope you take away those important things to not have the misconceptions about what this is. And then the next question I asked you is, well, how does all this happen? And you guys already know, right? We've already talked about this. So what is the mechanism that creates these changes? Well, if we go back to a couple lectures ago, back to a figure that we had, and we talked about, how life works and DNA, and we had this, right? We had our grandma's recipe book all the way to a cake, and we said, okay, well, we have DNA in the nucleus of our cell, and it gives us a protein. Well, the way these changes occur is something called a mutation. Now, a mutation is not three-eyed fish or anything like that. It is simply an inheritable change in an organism's genes. So any of those puppies, again, with just slight changes, that's a mutation from whatever the common stock was. It's nothing bad, happens all the time. It's the way nature works. And what this means, before we go on to kind of how this works, is another important thing I want to talk about is genes, because we throw this term around a lot, but it has a very specific definition. And a gene in particular is a sequence of DNA or RNA that codes for a molecule, and we already saw how it gets to a protein, how we code for these things. But that molecule has to have a function, all right? That's what a gene is. It codes for a molecule that does something, not just random sequences. So if we go back and we look at, the code of life, right? These are all the codes, the codons that code for amino acids. Well, it's changes in these, right, that'll change the amino acid that will actually change the function of whatever that protein is. So as that messenger RNA comes into the ribosome, right, if there's a difference here, that change is going to translate to a difference in the way these amino acids are strung together and what protein comes out, how it folds, and what it does. And that's how that works. Now, if you get enough of these changes, we can get a different species. So sometimes it might not matter, but if enough of them accumulate, we get a new species. Now, species is something that the definition is movable. Let's just say that. The strict definition is a group of actual or potentially interbreeding organisms. And by that I mean you can't take a bunny rabbit and breed it with a Komodo dragon, right? That's just not going to create anything. However, that isn't always the case. So you can have a dog and a wolf, for instance, which are different species, but they can produce offspring. So anyhow, there is that. Now, also, there's single-celled organisms, okay? So things that don't even breed, they just split, right? You have parent cells and daughter cells. So again, as we learn more about biology, this gets complicated. And we've now moved into defining organisms by genetic information because we can look at their genes, and by genetic similarity, just based on percentage. So what we can do is take a figure like this, oh my God, right? And this is stuff I have to look at all the time. Well, what this is every single line across is a different organism. And this is one very, very, very small section of their genome. And you can see, I'm telling you about it's 100, who knows how many I have here, I haven't counted, 50. And you can see on the sides, like look over here, they're all very similar. So when we line them up, that same region, we can see that part of it is exactly the same. I think that's what, CCC, G something. And same on the other side. Well, here in the middle are differences, all right? Things that do different things. And these changes might code for a different way or just a different physical feature of the organism. So what we'll do is, let's just for argument's sake say this is 100 letters long. And in general, we kind of say, okay, well, things are a different species or taxonomic unit. Don't worry about that too much. If they are 97% similar. So in 100 letters, if 97 of those are the same and only 3 are different, we consider those the same thing. Any more than that, and they're different, all right? So what we can do is we can take this information and we can start to build trees. We can start to build these figures of similarity. And what this means is each one of these lines on the horizontal, that distance is the percent similarity, all right? So the shorter the line, the more similar these organisms are. And it's interesting when you start doing this because, a dog is more similar to a walrus than a cat, right? So that's kind of interesting when you start looking at this genetically. And with this, we can build really big trees. We can start to see how every organism on the planet relates to one another. And we start to build things like this. And we've gone from, the traditional animal, plant, fungus, protist, and we've added, domains of life now. So this is all under the domain eukarya. We've talked a little bit about these. So the eukarya are the ones like us. They have a nucleus in their cell. They can be multicellular or single cellular, right? It's everything you can see, every plant and animal you can see is in eukarya. And then we've talked a little bit about the bacteria and archaea. These are the prokaryotes. They don't have a nucleus. They're much simpler as far as structure, but they also do some of those amazing metabolic processes that we can only dream of, right? And as you can see here, we've got this big, here's, eukarya with all the stuff and it's all laid out, and then here's some bacteria and archaea, and sure, those are microscopic and germs and whatnot. Well, I want to show you another figure. Same information, but just put out a little more proportionally accurate. And by that I mean is this is also a tree, and this is a tree just like that first one I showed you, where the length of these lines and how close they are determines their genetic similarity. And this entire area up here, this whole top part, is all bacteria. All bacteria. Down here in this section over here is all the archaea. So that's all prokaryotes, right? All this here are organisms without a nucleus. And then this little green part is all the eukaryotes. Every single animal, plant, fungus, protist, like everything you can see and most of the stuff you can't, or a lot of the stuff you can't, are just right here. And remember, these lines are based on genetic similarity. So what that means is if you focus on this one right here, this one little area, that is every single green plant that you can see, all of them. And this one over here is every single animal and fungus on the planet. Let that sink in a minute. If you think you're important, just note that you have genetically more in common with your salad than this bacteria has with that bacteria. Now, that probably puts things into perspective. If your place in the universe didn't, your place on the biological tree of life maybe does. But that's not to say that you're not important, and you guys are very important. This should actually have the opposite effect. Realizing that you have a small time and place on this planet, use it effectively, do everything you can, right? I hope coming through this course you have learned that, oh my God, there is so much to learn out there, and it can be exciting. I'm excited every day to learn this stuff. So what I want you guys to take away from this class and from this discussion of time and space is, use every moment effectively. Learn everything you can. Always question things, right? There's always a why. There's always a why behind every answer. And it's fun to find that out. You have all of the information known to man on your phone. Look for it. It's fun. So with that said, thank you guys so much for making it through this very interesting semester. Unprecedented as we move forward in this new environment that we're in. And I will say from all of us here at the, Kerrigan Wacky Oceanography Remote Learning Institute, have a great holiday season and good luck next semester. Bye now.